Streaming live from Treaty 1 territory in the heartland of the Métis Nation, the place where the great waterways meet and the heart of Turtle Island. We have guests from the territory of Toronto, which is grounded in the treaty of a dish with one spoon, and it's home to some of the most diverse population in Canada. We also have a really special guest from London, England, and another great guest from the other side of the planet, the beautiful island of Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm so excited to host the 5th Nuit Blanche Talk Series, Exhibitions, Galleries, and Social Distancing, with some great speakers such as Dr. Stephen Borys, who's the director and CEO of the Winnipeg Art Gallery and opening the first ever Inuit Art Center. Karl Chitham, who's the director of the Dowse Art Museum and past director of Tauranga Art Gallery in New Zealand. Then we have Devyani Saltzman, who's the director of programming at the Art Gallery of Ontario, who is an avid writer and curator. We have Gaëtane Verna, who's the director of the Power Plant Contemporary Art Gallery since 2012, and previously she was the executive director and chief curator of the Museum d'Art de Jolie. And finally, we have the multidisciplinary artist Thomas J. Price from London, England, whose work is engaged with issues of representation, perception in society and in art. We've had some really incredible conversations, and our past Nuit talks have reflected on the status of monuments, the struggles for performing arts. As we continue to social distance, we have discussed the necessities of reconfiguring audiences and the process of having people participate in public art. And on Tuesday, we considered ways in which massive public exhibitions, such as Nuit Blanche, Nocturne, and others, are moving towards new models and how they will continue to engage public within the global pandemic. Tonight, we're going to talk about art institutions to understand the impact of social distancing on the museum and gallery sector. As our guests are leaders, artists, and programmers who traverse the ambiguous and shifting health crisis as they share their plans to structurally accommodate COVID-19 restrictions and potential funding cuts. Through this discussion, our speakers will reflect on major institutions and the future of art collections, viewership, and access. Museums and galleries are spaces that have been rooted in Eurocentric models of museology and are constantly having to justify their position by numbers of bodies in their buildings for exhibitions and events. Many people struggle to get inside these spaces, as the white cube can be fraught with feelings of disconnection that resonates with many communities. Radically shifting art institutions is hard work, and sometimes this hard work comes when breaking new ground. This can be translated into pushing past old structures and ways of knowing with staff and audiences towards a new future that can be very taxing on everyone involved. Our guests represent the galleries and places they occupy as institutions who have been doing innovative work towards dismantling the colonial and racist structures that impact our communities greatly. Many of galleries have been moving towards the advancing ticket, social distancing to have people return to their space. We see the sector moving towards digital platforms, or do I dare say pivot? I'm super excited to begin our talk with starting with each guest reflecting on the radical shifts they've been able to create in their own galleries and practices moving forward. As we know, concepts of the museum are born out of Western ideologies of enlightenment. And how do you see the work that you are doing shifting that model? And has the global pandemic impacted this? And so I know that each of you guys have really unique positions and experiences in your own specific sectors. And I'm really excited to hear from all of you to talk a little bit about how you see it's been impacting your work and the kind of work that you've been doing to radically shift those spaces. Devyani, did you want to start?
I somehow knew I would be first, Julie.
It's because you're right beside me, and I just see your smiling face, and I was like, okay, Devyani, you start.
A lot to take in, and thank you so much for the invitation, and it's an honor to be here with all of you. I'm the director of public programming at the AGO, and I'm thinking in terms of, you're saying how has the pandemic influenced the shift in the work we're doing. First of all, the AGO, I think we reopened on July 23rd. It's been a really interesting experience. Before that, when March hit, we did the dreaded P word and we pivoted to digital online programming, which my team and I, along with our marketing team and other areas of the museum, supported very heavily. We came out the gate very fast with about 4 programs a week, from talks to an online performance program to making and videos and now school programs full steam. I guess what I'm trying to say is it was amazing to see how quickly we adapted to that and the increase in audience numbers. Bailey Court, which is our central space for talks, holds about 400. Within a few weeks, we were having talks that might have 100 or 200 in the moment, but 6,000 views by the end of the week. So the reach was incredible. But it also has led, obviously, to an ability in a moment to really reflect on structural change within the organization. I myself, if I'm honest, growing up, never saw myself within that space, coming from a mixed race background, and to now be working with a team on shifting it. And I think Stefan Yost is doing a really good job of taking all levels of the organization through an important conversation on structural racism and inclusion. I think we all know it's a very slow process, but in a way, the pandemic has been a gift in allowing us to pause and be self-reflective. I'm rambling a bit, excuse me, because it is a broad question. So we're on these two parallel tracks. One is a very internal structural conversation around race, around equity, around the colonial legacy of the organization we work within. And the other is digital production on a level we've never done before, and adapting to it and reaching new audiences. So I'd say it's an intense time. I might just stop there and add something later on.
Yeah, you're just like, it's an intense time. I feel like everybody could definitely smile and
Real
agree
talk.
with that. Yeah. I've been fortunate to do a few talks with both Devyani and Gaëtane, so I feel like it's the three of us on the top, and so it kind of makes me smile a little bit. I don't know, Stephen, do you want to pick it up from there? Because there's lots of cross conversation that I think that's happening with both the Winnipeg Art Gallery and the AGO.
Sure, thanks, Julie. The WAG was the first major museum in the country to reopen back like on May 7th. And we didn't do it to be first in line. We did it because it's something we've been talking about what we mean to the community for a couple of years now. And, we have the Inuit Art Center is going to open in January. It's a new building, it's a new idea, but largely it's a conversation. And largely with the thanks to the Indigenous Circle at the WAG, which is a group of about 20 First Nations, Métis, and Inuit leaders, cultural advocates, artists, guiding us, pushing us, challenging us to rethink what the role of the museum is as we plan to open an Inuit Art Center, which, while it's an extraordinary building with an amazing collection, 95% of what we've produced, published, exhibited from that collection has been done by non-Indigenous. So that got us started, and COVID actually has simply pushed us, expedited, given us more momentum to rethink what is the role of the museum in the city. And I think of museums and galleries in Canada, the amount of real estate we own downtown in our cities, and who is welcome and who isn't, who feels they're part of it, who sees themselves and who doesn't. And back in March, back in April, back in May, so recreation centers are closed, gyms are closed, bars are closed, restaurants are closed, a lot of retail was closed. And we had the chance to open and simply to be a space, regardless of what was on the walls. And we did that, and it's continued to build again and confirm that as you rethink what the role of the museum is in the city and how we can be useful beyond the idea of art for art's sake, in terms of forum and dialogue, in terms of not just decolonization, but the indigenization, it confirmed again that we're on the right track. We have a long way to go, but it helped us understand, wow, when we open the Inuit Art Center, it is about real, virtual, in-person audiences, but more importantly, it's about spaces that are accessible, that have the public trust.
Yeah, it was a hard conversation. It was just in the WAG, I guess, last week. And it was so, not disheartening, but it was a big shift to think about opening this beautiful space that everybody's been working so hard to put together. And Stephen gave us this beautiful tour of the space. And, I know you'll laugh, but I walked in and went, yikes, because it was just like, it's so massive and beautiful, and the light comes in just stunningly, and it was just like, and then I sat in a meeting talking about only having 50 people across the gallery, And, you know, when we had originally talked about it and kind of through the conception of it to the building of it to now to opening it, you know, up until March, I was always imagining, you know, whole wax of people celebrating how beautiful that space is. And I think that it's going to be an interesting time. I don't know, Gaëtane, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the great stuff you guys been doing over at the power plant?
Well, thank you. Thanks again, Julie, for inviting me. As I always say, I can never say no to you.
I like this.
I think that for us, it's been really interesting. In the last few years, the work that the power plant has been doing has really been driven with a shared vision by our team to be, you know, culturally diverse at all levels of the organization and also at the board level. So in a sense, what has been really interesting as, you know, like between our staff, our donors, board members, you know, I can say that we range from all levels of society. And for me, some of the most interesting comments that I receive from some of my higher donors, you know, higher net worth people who said to me that had they not been engaging with the gallery for the last, let's say, 6 to 7 years, you know, the word, I don't know, culturally diverse or the word inclusion, because I would always say that, you know, diversity, especially in Toronto, is a fact, but that inclusion is an action. It's not just you have to bring people in, you have to speak to them. And for me, the greatest compliment is to have, you know, all levels of society and those people who, you know, for too long say they don't know, saying, you know what, following your program, we know, and we understand what's happening. So for me and for the team in general, it really made us feel that, you know, because at the same time, as we all know, when you decide to do something in an institution, you have people who criticize, you know, so some of the criticism of the power plant is that we show too many artists of color.
Sorry, am I allowed to laugh there? I'm like, is that a real thing? I feel like that's just like, okay, sorry, keep going.
You know, when you hear this from someone and then somebody says it to one of your staff and the staff comes back and goes, it's a true thing, then it's good, because I feel we've been disrupting the conversation for a long time. And so I think for us, what it has meant was that we knew what we were doing and why we were doing. So we don't have to change what we're doing in a certain sense, because the trajectory that from our programs and from our exhibition and from what, you know, each time you program something, I'm always sure of the artist, but I'm always weary about the public and how they will receive the work. And it's very interesting that you that you invited Thomas here, because, you know, about, I don't even know now, 3 or 4 years ago, 3 years, Thomas and I started a discussion to have him exhibit at the power plant summer 2019. And so the show we had were, you know, a 9-foot tall sculpture of a Black man on the south side of the power plant. And, you know, let's not forget that year the Raptors won the NBA finals. So everybody thought that figure was a basketball player, and we like, no, it's a man. And then we installed some of his massive heads of Black composite images, you know, a figure of a Black males. And his subject matter was about the absence of representation of Black figures in monumental sculpture. So this was summer 19. And then we had everything that happened this you know, this spring. And I have board members going, oh my God, but wasn't that what Thomas was talking about? And I'm like, yeah, you know. So this is all serendipitous, because in a certain sense, we couldn't have thought about it. We couldn't have thought that we would be at this crossroad where that's why I love and respect artists, because, you know, Thomas did not start thinking of this in May. He had been thinking of it for a long time. So I think as institution, and as an institution that's non-collecting, we have more, we're more nimble. We can pivot, here's that awful word. We can change in a faster way, and we don't have the weight, right, of the museum holding us down. So I would say that in the last few years, a lot of the subject matter and themes that are now the subject of our common conversation, we had been doing that work. And the last thing I would say, that it's from our perspective, the one thing is the digital, even though we all miss this physical reaction to being together, what it has done is a symposium that we did had people from Bangladesh, people from New Zealand, people from Borneo. Like, it's like you can't believe where those people are, and listening to you talk about colonization and, you know, Ethiopia and Italy and Mussolini, and you're doing this on a Saturday morning, and all these people are tuning in from all across the world. So I do believe that there's nothing like the physical reaction to an artwork, but being pushed to go digital has opened doors to many more conversation across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say that's probably one of the best outcomes. And as somebody who likes to work internationally, mostly because the Pacific just keeps like calling me back, and I just think that it's just such an incredible opportunity to open up those doors for those international conversations. And you know, there's been so much fruitful opportunity from that. Thomas, I think it's a great segue for you to talk a little bit about all your amazing work and how you've been able to like.
I think Gaëtane's done it for me.
Yeah, I know. I was just gonna say, I don't know what's left to say. I'm sure there's some stuff.
I'm out. Yeah.
Yeah, drop the mic.
Yeah, right. Well, thank you for the invite, and thank you, Gaëtane, for a very good introduction. Yeah, it's interesting. You know, this kind of this spring, this what's come from COVID and the sort of compression of everyone being having to kind of isolate or social distance has sort of, you know, obviously it's very distressing, but at the same time it has brought a kind of a focus, I think, to people's contemplations, and it's sort of limited the other options. So I think people have started to be almost forced to consider, you know, the real issues which are happening. You know, in terms of representation, I don't know, I think with the death of, you know, George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and the sort of the protests and the moment of reckoning that's coming from that, you know, I say in the present tense, because hopefully we're still pushing for it. Yeah. It's brought a focus onto perhaps some of the work I've been doing and other artists like myself have been doing for a long time now. You know, I've been doing it for almost 20 years, and for a long time before the power plant sort of looked at the work and gave me the show there, which was a big turning point. I think that my work was looked at as controversial or almost far-fetched. You know, like, why, you know, I was asked many times when I was studying and in the early stages, you know, why do you only sculpt Black people? You know, this was a genuine question that was put to me by very well-meaning people. And I remember at the beginning I used to try and answer it, you know, as if, oh, that's right, as if the de facto was not to do that. So I think, yeah, there's been this focus now on these issues and on monuments. You know, I initially started looking at who was in the gallery spaces as a way to look at how we see one another and how we process the sort of identities of one another, how we create identities and how societies create identities. And that kind of pushed me to looking outside of the gallery space in terms of kind of gaining access or giving access to people who wouldn't necessarily feel at home in galleries, you know, welcome in galleries. You know, I think a lot of non-art world people probably feel slightly out of place in the white cube kind of arena. But I think particularly if you're not white and you've been sort of brought up with this sort of this conditioning of this space and also this subject, this cultural area is not perhaps for you. It creates a lot of sort of internal internal conflict, and you can internalize the sort of the negatives and take them on to be your own. But so a lot of the work I do is really about trying to confront the ways that we are conditioned within societies and as individuals, and present an alternative which looks at kind of dismantling the whole structure of the whole power structures, not just trying to create or be as good as something. So I don't want to kind of create these sculptures to look just like what's gone before, except with, you know, maybe a black face on it. It's about looking at the very language and the very structure of, you know, the way that the very format itself of monumentalism and portraiture, and that's why I do kind of, you know, made up people to kind of critique the fundamental nature of portraiture itself and how we kind of attribute status to people. Now I'm rambling because it is one something here, but
yeah, I was just gonna say thank you so much. Like last time LC came on and it was 4 in the morning for him on the other, you know, and so we are super thankful. So yes, I am aware it is very late for you.
You just have to keep me on target.
Yeah. I was like, you weren't rambling. I was captivated. Keep going. Sorry, keep going if you want to finish. Don't.
No, I think I'll come back in later on as we develop it. Yeah. Okay,
great. And so I think so Karl, I'm going to lean on you a little bit, but just to give you give some context to our viewers, is Karl is situated in Aratoa, which has had very few cases. You know, the way that you guys have been operating in terms of your galleries and museums has been very different. And the other thing that I think is really important to talk a little bit about of the kind of politicization, you know, New Zealand is a bicultural country, and that means for Maori and for the British. And I think that there's, you know, similarly how Canada's a bicultural country from the two colonizers, you're actually situated from your treaty to the treaty with the British. And there's also a handful of Maori directors, yourself included, that are in positions of power. And I think it's really interesting in terms of some of the stuff that's happening out in New Zealand, because we can look to you guys as examples who are leading the way in terms of indigenizing and decolonizing. And, you know, you're also a little bit fierce. So with that, I'll let you go, Karl.
Kia ora koutou, and thanks heaps, Julie. That was quite an introduction. I think to kind of start off, it's a very different context here than it would be in Canada or the UK. And one of the reasons for that is our size. We're very small and we're quite a long way from a lot of places, which has allowed us to, particularly around the COVID situation, it's allowed us to be isolated, but it also has accentuated our isolation quite a lot. So I remember when we first went into lockdown, so we went into lockdown in March, and we came out in May, and that was a full lockdown, not allowed to leave the house. And that was the entire country. And so when we came out in May, I remember having multiple conversations about the change or the shift from being this kind of global art world to being a very local art world. And that was particular to New Zealand because we didn't want to open our borders. And I think that was felt universally across the country because of the way that things were shifting so radically and in some cases not changing at all. So we kind of got into the situation where we were trying to create a new space and a new opportunity for those artists that were based in New Zealand to have shows or to have opportunities that they hadn't had previously, because we were quite often bringing shows from overseas or internationally, which really has given us a chance to kind of change our programs, I guess. As Julie said, there's 3 of us that run public art galleries that are Māori, and we're directors. And that really has given us license, I guess, to radically change some things if we wanted to do that. So I know one of my colleagues, Harani, who runs Te Tuhi Gallery, she has kind of changed the model of the way that they employ curators as well. So They're now moving to guest curators as opposed to employed curators, which also allows us to change up the model of the type of curator they're sort of talking back to diversity that we were talking about before, but diversity across a whole lot of different boundaries. New curators versus experienced curators, Māori curators, or curators from the Pacific. So I think without COVID, that may not have been as easy a transition, I think. In the case of the Dowse Art Museum, where I've been coming up to 2 years now, so I've spent nearly half that time dealing with a pandemic. That again has allowed us to change our thinking around why do we program certain things into the gallery? What is the outcome that we're looking for? So obviously it's about audience, but who is that audience? And now that we've moved to more of a local focus, and a lot of our local government has done that as well, how do we shift the thinking around the types of projects that we preference in that program? So definitely at the Dowse Art Museum, and we've also got a neighbouring museum in Porirua, which is also in the region that we're in, which is also run by a Māori director, Ruben Friend. Both of our programs sort of parallel this idea about preferencing Māori and other voices in our programs. So I think this has been a huge opportunity for us. I'll touch briefly on the digital thing only because it's there and we're currently doing it. I think it has changed a lot of the way that we think about connecting with people. It's not about jumping on a plane anymore. And to a degree, I'm all for that. But what it's also brought about is a realization about how limited we are in that digital space, particularly in New Zealand. I've always thought of us as being quite forward thinking and quite progressive in digital innovation, but actually, when push came to shove, I couldn't even get Zoom to work. So I think a lot of those things, streaming, all of those kind of ways that we're programming now have made us rethink what's possible. I'll leave it there. I might be rambling too.
No, like, come on, nobody's rambling. It's all good. It's all good. It's the morning for you. You can't have this. You can't give that same excuse. I'd say that it's true. I think that there's some things in terms of thinking about the digital realm, which has posed different kinds of challenges, and an acute awareness of most galleries and museums having a poor digital platform, or really not much in terms of that kind of virtual content. And also too, there's a reluctancy. I mean, not for everybody that's on the call, but I'd say more broadly, there's a reluctancy to want to show digital media art because of the complications of thinking about the technological connections that you actually need to be able to show that. And I think that that's something now that we're like searching and looking for, and there's been kind of an outcome of that being the shift to the virtual realm. And the other thing I would say is that I agree in terms of thinking about it's been really nice to be home and to have that kind of introspective or reflective space of thinking about what's important. But I want you guys to talk a little bit about, how has COVID impacted how people engage with your spaces? For those of you that have collections or educational events or, physical people coming. I know with Nuit Blanche, we can't have a physical event because we have 1.2 million people that come out. And if we were to do something like a projection on the side of the wall, we'd run the risk of potentially having, thousands of people come. And that's something that, obviously the city of Toronto can't condone. And so I think that it's really interesting to see watching, we had on earlier, we had July Talk, and they were talking about how they had moved their performance to a drive-in and how that was kind of exciting and exhilarating. And I know that, there was also
talk about that, Julie, whenever.
Yeah, do it. You talk about it. So then you go, you pick it up.
It's just very interesting because it's in real time for us. I mean, as I said, the museum had been open, but we're at about, I think it's about a 750 person cap with time tickets now. and it's actually been quite steady in attendance at that's about 85 people per half hour. And we have the benefit of this large giant space, a city block in downtown Toronto. So the team, we've been working through a combination of, in essence, hybrid experiences for audiences. We have our Hey Gu Yang exhibition opening right now and this online digital content, but there's such a hunger for live connectivity. So one of the things the team has done, and I'm really proud of them, is we basically, because of the hard hit on the performing arts sector, and especially spaces that no longer have venues, whether it's symphonies or theater companies, we, our performance curator, Bojana Stanchik, created something called Hello from the Other Side. And in essence, we've given the heart of the museum over to any arts org that needs space and needs to be able to reach audiences and potentially fundraise against that because of their own struggles. So at the moment, the Toronto Symphony is in tomorrow between 2 and 4 and last Friday. And we're seeing people come in and just sit for 2 hours. And it's obviously been a challenge for visitor services because we want more people to connect, but the hunger for seeing each other and hearing live music and being part of a collective experience is incredible. So it's just been interesting to adapt with time ticketing and caps and visitor flow through spaces, while also offering space up to our partners who don't have homes right now. I feel I'm rambling. I will stop.
No, you could no more. Nobody's rambling. You are all very articulate and lovely. So keep going. Who wants to pick it up?
We just, so we had been closed since March. We opened in July just for 2 days to wrap up the shows. And then we just reopened last Friday. And what was very interesting, you know, the power plant is much smaller footprint than the AGO. And really, it's been steady, maximum of 50 people at a time. And what was really impressive for us, at least for the opening, was that every colleague, such as AGO or ROM, were saying that when people RSVP, 50% of the people don't show up. And we had about 120 people RSVP, and only 11 people did not show up for the opening, which really meant that, you know, the people who wanted to engage with us, you know, made the point of coming out. And some of the comments that we received were that, you know, for some people, it was the first public activity that they were doing besides, you know, seeing family, and that it felt so good to be in the museum or at the power plant in the gallery in front, physically interacting with works of art, and also having a sense of community, because in our institution, which, you know, on an average, sorry, on an average, maybe we have 70,000 visitors. So these people come back. So which it's a community that comes around the gallery, and to see them starting to come back out felt really, really, really good. And also the artists were thrilled. So one thing we've been very adamant about, as we have circulating exhibition, is not to cancel any exhibition, but to postpone them. And then because of the pandemic, we were supposed to have a show in the fall, which we have to push back to 2022. So technically, I asked those 3 artists to develop new shows with our team, I think in April or May. So it's been really quick, but to see how everybody from artists to staff to visitors are engaged with coming back is really, really great. Of course, none of our education and public program can be done, you know, physically, and they have to be done online. And the last thing I'd like to say is we started this program with, it was an original idea of our colleagues at Contemporary Calgary, which it's called fieldtrip.art, where everybody, like a series of institutions that are all, you know, producing educational program, how we all work together on one platform to put, excuse me, to put that information and to share it, which I don't think we would have thought of doing this, you know, before March. and how easily we all got together and went, oh my God, this is what we need to do. So I think it's also, for me, I think the art sector is so resilient. We're so quick. We're such hard workers. We're so full of ideas, and collaboration has been really nice. How everybody's calling each other saying, can you get on a call? Can you do this talk with me? Like I did with Stefan. And I'm like, oh yeah, sure, I'll do it. You know, it wasn't like, oh, sorry, I'm busy, I don't have time to do this. So I think there's been a great sense of collaboration within the sector, as I feel that all of us really feel that we're at the service of our institution, our publics, and our artists also, because while we can complain about certain things, you know, artists are like not having work, or having exhibition canceled, or not performing. So how can we also be supportive of that community, which is, you know, in facing the same difficult situation as others in every you know, level of our society.
Maybe I
Thomas,
should jump in. Yeah.
I feel like you should jump in, only because I think it'd be great to hear that from an artist's perspective, in terms of thinking about how has things shifted for you as a practitioner, and then, you know, have you been able to attend or have any kind of events, and what that's like, and, you know, all those bits.
Yeah, I mean, as the pandemic started to bite, I had lots of friends who are artists who were slowly having their shows postponed, and then, you know, effectively cancelled towards the beginning part of the realization that this was going to be quite long term and was going to have a real impact. And then as we sort of started to have strategies, we being the industry, have strategies to kind of to deal with, you know, what's ongoing. There were a lot of shows which were then turned into video, kind of raw videos of the show, video tours, to kind of digitize and try and create a kind of a gallery experience, I guess, virtually. And I was really impressed by a lot of my friends who just embraced it and went with it and put on some incredible works, some incredible shows, you know, via laptops, basically. For my own experience, I've just been incredibly lucky because, as I said earlier, you know, I've been pushing over the last few years. I've been pushing to have work in the public realm, which always came with its own hardships, because it can cost quite a lot of money and it can be quite hard to raise the funds. But I managed to have a few which kind of carried on, and one was installed in the UK, in London, not too long ago. And, you know, whilst indoor exhibitions have been very hard to kind of maintain the access, the outdoors is where everyone's been kind of encouraged to go to and to kind of enjoy the culture. And so there, like I said before, there's been this kind of focus on outdoor activities and on arts, generally speaking. I think, you know, arts became this this activity that everyone in society could then turn to kind of to keep themselves occupied, basically, and to keep themselves positive. And so the work, this 9-foot bronze sculpture of a young woman I've installed in London, has sort of got a lot of attention because it's noticed. People have been made aware of the outdoors. People have been made aware of the cultural aspects, the cultural richness of the things that are around them in their cities and you know, wherever they live, which they've been able to gain access to. So, I mean, I have to be honest, it's been a very busy time for me, sort of trying to keep things going, and obviously, you know, foundries and other people I work with are really pushed in terms of, because they've got to do social distancing, they've got to work safely. But I think one of the big impacts for myself and for other artists is this inability to mix. You know, I can't talk for every artist out there, but I spend a lot of time by myself. I spend a lot of time in the studio, and you sort of work to these points where you're going to interact. You know, it might be your show, it might be your friend's show, it might be just a show you're looking forward to. It's the events like it, you know, the power plant, the NGO. It's these kind of waypoints that you sort of try and swim towards, and when those are taken away from you, it can become exhausting. And And I think, you know, I like other people we're trying to deal with this as it develops and as we learn about it and as we learn about ourselves and the capacity we have to keep going, I guess, and to find other strategies, other things to focus on. I'm going to be in a show which opens in London, the Goodman Gallery next week on the 6th, and there's no actual opening for that show, but they will be doing tours apparently. But it's learning, I guess, managing expectations. As we all, you know, everyone in society has to start to learn and almost constantly reevaluate their expectations and their understandings of how we live our lives. So it's been a mixed sort of bag for me. But I think just looking at my friends and you know, peers, I think there's different experiences going on, and yeah, it's, you know, you've got to stay positive, but it is quite tough.
Yeah, I know that a lot of us have been talking about the impact of, you know, just sitting away and working away, and then there's no reward. And
Yeah.
so, like, whether that means connecting with your friends or being celebrated at an event that you've worked really hard to get towards something that, you know, the same thing. It's like I was making jokes like, am I sitting in the house cracking a bottle of wine on Saturday night celebrating that I just did Nuit Blanche? Like, I was just like, because it's going to be very different than I've been walking around the city engulfed in all the people, you know, the full stress and the excitement of it. And so that is a big shift, that you're working really hard towards something and you just, there's no, you know.
Yeah,
no.
well, I mean, there's always a chance that I'm just not getting the invites, you know.
Fair point. Stephen or Karl, would you guys want to pick up?
Hey, sure. You know, I when we reopened, we actually lowered the threshold on a few things in terms of people bringing in drinks, handbags, where they could go, what they didn't have to check, and people started to change how they behaved in the museum. And it doesn't really surprise me because, you know, Arthur Cohen will tell you that 75% of millennials go to museums to chill out. And they get their information before they go there. They know how they want to get it. And I was seeing this happen, but what I really was impressed with was people watching other people and aware of the space between them and an object and another person. And it created a dynamic that actually sometimes museums covet or try to make happen. And this was happening over and over. The biggest difference is also the not just the demographics coming in, but because we lost the school groups, and, you know, we have like thousands of kids every year, it changed, and it really, I missed that. And I realized, you know, in terms of the role of a museum today in the K-12 curriculum and what we can be in terms of a useful body, really kind of stuck with me. I mean, the other thing is, I keep on thinking about how people normally access art because of the way we present it, in terms of protocols, in terms of narratives, in terms of didactics. And as we looked to save money when our revenue was dropping, we turned to our collections, brought out more collections, and each curator took a show. And it actually allowed people to see the museum in a different light. And I think we've engaged people in a different way. We've the level of trust that people see within our spaces as this is a safe, this is a respectful, this is a useful place to be in terms of forum or dialogue, has actually served us really well. It's helped educate us, my board, our teams, and made me feel that they understand we're here for the long haul. And it just felt good understanding how people may change in terms of if they're given more liberty physically, socially within our spaces. So it was positive.
Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the stuff around the Inuit Arts Center? Just because I think we're going to give Karl the shot, and then I think we're close to wrapping up. Yeah.
So, you know, it's interesting. We're building this new center. The combined buildings gives us the campus about 165,000 square feet. The Inuit Center is connected on every level to the Winnipeg Art Gallery building. But what's happened is the Inuit Center, the program, the mission has changed the WAG and how we do business and how it's shifted the moral compass of our museum. And because we are working with a body of work by artists that are remotely removed from this setting in the South, and we're doing it in Treaty 1 Métis homeland, it's a really interesting mix of how our audiences are seeing that culture. And the biggest shift is because we're dealing with artists and makers and elders who live hundreds of miles away and do not have that physical connection, we've already looked at how we communicate with them through art making, through lectures, through curatorial work, through education. Our kids are doing that all the time now in our spaces. So the Inuit Center has actually laid down some really important groundwork to how we can advance and find that hybrid institution that has the combination of in-person, physical, as well as virtual.
Karl, did you want to get a few cents in there?
I just wanted to talk about the comment that came up in the chat, which was about time, people not having enough time. And one thing that was really prevalent, particularly during our lockdown, was the sort of what people gave lots of names to, but it was kind of digital exhaustion. Just being plugged in constantly for what was effectively 3 months here, or 2.5 months. 8 hours a day on your computer, on your phone, on social media, trying to engage with each other, just completely wiped everybody out. And so when we came out of lockdown, I think a lot of people became very frustrated by that, but also there was that whole thing about in-person contact, that there was this kind of barrier there. So it kind of caused, I think it caused a lot of stress and pressure for people coming back into our institution initially, because we do contact tracing at certain levels of moving out of lockdown, which means you have to sign in or do a little app. And so we noticed our audiences drop off. So we had to kind of flip the way that we were engaging with people. And one thing that became really obvious both during lockdown and post-lockdown was that people were looking for these really unique experiences that removed them from the stress of everyday life. So they were looking for things that were fun or made them think in a way that was more aspirational or inspirational, as opposed to, you know, how do I get my shopping? You know, is there going to be toilet paper at the supermarket? Those sorts of things. They wanted to kind of move past that, and it was artists, art, and galleries that were able to provide that removal, that space. And a lot of the social media that we were doing was around workshops with artists, led by artists, that really it was just a platform for artists to deliver whatever content they wanted to. But it really did, I felt like it was making a real difference. But it was still that time thing. People were becoming very picky about the types of experiences they wanted. One other thing that we've done in post-lockdown is talking about education and children coming into the gallery, is that a lot of schools have opted now for us to go to them. So they don't want to come into the galleries as much as they used to. So that's again changed the way that we're thinking about engaging with children in their spaces. And a lot of our education programs are based around funding models, where it's about the number of kids that come to us, not the number that we teach externally. So having to shift that, and I know the Ministry of Education, the government organisation, are really rethinking their funding model around that as well. So I think all those things together have sort of, not sure how to wrap that up, but it's all kind of an exciting new way of thinking about things, while also kind of dealing with the pressures that are coming with that.
Yeah, I feel like oh, go ahead, Devyani, because I was just going to say, you guys take a chance at talking a little bit about the funding models and how that's going to work in terms of, because I think it's such an important conversation.
Well, one thing I think, I mean, for us at the power plant is that, and the Canadian government has really been supportive, you know, in terms of, you know, giving money to support cost of staff, you know, to a certain level. But because our business model as a free gallery is not based on ticket sales, right? It's easier for us to survive this than bigger organization who were pushed to have a business model to, you know, support events and ticket sales and weddings and, you know, all of these things which are not happening. And the other element, while being in lockdown and restrictions of travels, is tourism, you know, the impact of tourism on each of our institutions. And you see how the world was already very connected, and then you see that difficulty on people and on institutions. So I think, you know, if it's hard for institutions now, I have a feeling that next year might be harder. You know, and how do we come out of it, and how do cities and all the levels of government, with the downfall of businesses and the economy, that, you know, taxes generating money, generating a revenue, it's going to be really difficult. The good news, I would say, on our side is our donors have been really, really supportive. No one has said, oh no, sorry, you know, we're not interested in supporting. People have been donating more, and whichever level people were donating. And they also, we've often heard that people felt the need to support us and continue to support us because they understood the value proposition, but also the necessity that we were a bridge between the work of artists and communities. And so they felt by supporting our gallery, they were also supporting artists. So I think that it will be interesting to see how the different funding bodies, what they ask of each of us, depending on the model of the organization, to validate our role within community and within society. And I think also our boards are going to have to understand that you can't function at the level that we were functioning at before. It's not possible because the resources are not there. The bodies are not there because we cannot all be together. And that's it's going to push all of us to kind of, you know, rethink our funding models, but rethink why we do what we do and for whom we're doing it, and what does success mean in terms of an institution, you know? As Karl was saying, is it the fact that he goes to and impacts the lives of children in their school, or is it the fact that they are actually in the museum, you know? So we're going to have those conversations, and funding bodies are going to have to understand that, that, you know, we're all forced to change and to rethink while still being involved and having the same goals and objective in terms of the mandate of our organizations.
Devyani or Stephen, you want to get a last?
Yeah, I was kind of sorry, Julie, you had switched to funding and I was just reacting a bit to Karl, but I'm just thinking a lot about service in terms of our community and audiences, and the kind of words that jump out to me in this conversation are Thomas talking about reevaluation and constant reevaluation, whether that's one's own artistic practice or practice of curation and programming, or how we run organizations. So I guess what's top of mind is service reevaluation. And Gaëtane and I were on a panel discussing what is success in this moment. And with Zoom fatigue, and at the 6-month mark with no vaccine in sight, we don't really know. And we won't know what that looks like 3 months from now or a year from now. So the dreaded pivot word aside, I'm just thinking a lot about what people need and what are small moments of joy in a really challenging and painful time, whether that's being with a work or being in community or museum, a space for forum and discourse, or a musical experience when we're starved to hear something live. So just reflecting on that.
Yeah, for sure. I'm just gonna, Stephen, you want to get a quick word in, or I'm just gonna wrap us up. So I don't want to cut you or Thomas off. So as long as you guys are okay. I know Thomas is like, I need to go to bed. It's now 2 a.m. in the morning for me. He's just like saying this.
I'm getting my second win now.
Like, can we have a drink after? The I want to say end by saying thank you to and saying thank you to our continued support from our partners at the University of Toronto Scarborough, the Dorothy McCarthy Gallery, and to recognize the support of the Province of Ontario Celebrate Program Grant. I want to say Chimagwich, Marcy, and thank you to our guests who given up their time to bring their critical thoughts here tonight. And as you know, it's always a pleasure to get to see your faces. And I'm really thankful for you guys bringing your good hearts and your good minds to the digital pivot square as we sit in our Zoom exhaustion. So I really, really appreciate it. And I guess the big thing is I should say is Nuit opens on Saturday, October 3rd, and we're extending it to October 12th. So please log on to the Toronto City of Toronto website to come experience the virtual Nuit that we are putting forward. And our next Nuit talk is a one-on-one with me and Mayor John Tory that opens up on the Saturday night. And he's a very strong proponent of the artists and the creative sector for the City of Toronto, and is a real champion for Nuit and the arts in general. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. And thanks to our speakers for coming out. And bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.